Hello everybody and welcome to another video today. This is going to be my second mid-season review video I've done throughout the week. I did one covering the North Melbourne Football Club and the West Coast Eagles Football Club, and now I'm going to do another one with two lower ranked sides. However, this one is a bit more of a positive one. These two sides, they are both rebuilding clubs, and I'm going to be talking about what they've done right in their rebuild, what they've done wrong, and how their rebuild is going overall. So a bit more of a positive one today, despite still being about two bottom 10 ranked sides. Anyway, I think it's about time we get into it. Not much more needs to be said. Alright, kicking off the Adelaide review, I'm just going to get straight into their scores for the season. I need to get this out pretty quickly. In round 1, they lost to Fremantle by 1 point. In round 2, they lost to Collingwood by 42 points. In round 3, they won against Port Adelaide by 4 points. In round 4, they lost to Essendon by 4 points. In round 5, they beat Richmond by 19 points. In round 6, they beat the Bulldogs by 1 point. In round 7, they lost to GWS by 59 points. In round 8, they lost to Carlton by 48 points. In round 9, they lost to Brisbane by 36 points. In round 10, they lost to St Kilda by 21 points. And in round 11, they lost to Geelong by 42 points. So, as you can see there is a mixed bag of results. Earlier in the season, they competed really well, and they did get a couple of stunning victories on the board. The first of which came in that famous showdown, which will now be remembered as the Jordan Dawson game. Obviously, he won that off his own boot after the siren with a bit of a wonky, wayward kick, but it came back and, it got them the win, the most unlikeliest of showdown wins. Then they got a very solid win over Richmond in round 5 and backed it up the following week by going to Ballarat and beating the Dogs on their home turf, their home away from home, by a singular point. And Taylor Walker in that game racked up his 500th goal. Not to mention there were also some other very valiant losses in that time. Obviously, the round 1 game against Fremantle, they almost came back from a big halftime deficit. Josh Rochelle went nuts, kicking 5 goals in his first game of AFL footy. Then they went down to Essendon in a high-scoring affair by 4 points. That game, Josh Rochelle got his Rising Star nomination. He obviously didn't get it in round 1 because Nick Martin also kicked 5 goals on debut. But yeah, since about round 6, they've started to head on a downward trajectory. Their losses haven't been awful. I feel like in their 5 most recent losses, they've at least been somewhat competitive in 4 of those games. Their loss to GWS was probably the one outlier where they just completely got obliterated. Against Carlton, they played well for a half, and I mean, really, it was only just the third quarter that Carlton blew them away. In the first and second, they looked competitive, and in the last quarter, they did win that last quarter. Against Brisbane, they led at half-time. Then Brisbane kicked away in the second half. Against St Kilda, inaccurate kicking for goal really cost them the game. They were in front for most of that game. And against Geelong, again, inaccurate goal kicking could have kept them in that game for longer. So, for a rebuilding side, I think they're going well. Obviously, some of their young guns are really firing. Josh Rochelle obviously has had a brilliant first season so far. Slowed down a little bit, but that's sort of what you expect from a first-year player. James Rowe, I feel like, has been pretty good this season. Ned McHenry, I've noticed him a bit as well. Some of their more senior players as well have been playing quite well. Ben Keys looks on track to win their best and fairest. Jordan Dawson has come to the club and has had an immediate impact. Taylor Walker, he's been pretty alright since his return from suspension in round 4. Shane McAdam, I feel like, is probably one of the most underrated forwards in the game right now. He kicked a goal against Geelong, a couple of bad misses, but he can pop up and take a few really good marks, kick a few really good goals. Pretty athletic. Good signs for them, I think. There's definitely a few players I've missed out on there that have played well. I expect them to win tomorrow night. Well, not tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon against the Eagles. I'm recording this on the Friday night after the Friday night footy match. Yeah, I expect them to beat the Eagles pretty comfortably. Pretty much every team is able to do that. So, yeah, things looking good for Adelaide. Probably a year or two before they really challenge for finals, potentially make finals, yet. Rebuild on track, still a bit of a way to go, and let's start talking about Hawthorn now, I think it is best to do. Alright, so hopping into the Hawthorn mid-season review now, let's just go over all of their games and scorelines so far. In round 1, they started off with a win against North Melbourne by 20 points. In round 2, they beat Port Adelaide by 64 points. In round 3, they lost to Carlton by 1 point. In round 4, they lost to St Kilda by 69 points. In round 5, they beat Geelong by 12 points. In round 6, they lost to Sydney by 41 points. In round 7, they lost to Melbourne by 10 points. In round 8, they lost to Essendon by 27 points. In round 9, they lost to Richmond by 23 points. In round 10, they beat Brisbane by 5 points. And most recently, in round 11, they lost to Gold Coast by 67 points. So again, like Adelaide, there is a very mixed bag of results in there. There are some absolutely stunning, beautiful wins, and there are some absolutely stinky, shocking, awful losses in there. Starting off with their wins, most notably in round 2 was their 64-point win over Port Adelaide, in Adelaide. At the time, that was an absolutely insane upset. No one expected them to beat Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide did lose the week before, but it was to Brisbane at the Gabba, and they only just lost after leading in the 3rd and 4th quarter. So no one expected Hawthorn to win that one. Then there was the Easter Monday win over Geelong. No one really expected them to win that one either, since they'd just been completely smashed the week before. And their win against Brisbane was their other really good win. They went down to UTAS, their home away from home. It was a high-scoring affair, a lot of free kicks, a lot of controversial free kicks going both ways, but they got the win by 5 points. It was a really good win for them, a really good game in all. But some of their losses have been just as bad as well. Obviously, I mean, you expect that with a rebuilding side, but their biggest loss was against St Kilda. That was a 69-point loss, although they kicked a couple of goals late, so it could have been even worse. In round 6, they bottled a 32-point lead halfway through the first quarter. They even led still at 3-quarter time and managed to lose by 41 points. It was a complete choke, that one. Against Essendon, only a couple of weeks later, they choked again. Had a 25-point or something like that lead in the 3rd quarter. Then Essendon kicked 8 goals to 1 in the last, and Peter Wright went ballistic. They lost by 27. And then against Richmond, the Richmond loss wasn't so bad. They did have a bit of a lead and then bottled it again, but most recently their loss to Gold Coast was arguably their worst loss. Went up to Darwin, just got absolutely smashed right from the get-go. Never looked in that game. So, look, they they're ahead of Adelaide on the ladder. Perhaps not for much longer, with Adelaide coming up against West Coast. So, in terms of some of their bright young stars, Jai Newcomb, obviously he was picked up in the mid-season trade period, not trade period, the mid-season draft. The mid-season trade period doesn't exist. Yeah, he got picked up in the mid-season draft last year. And really burst onto the scenes. He was brilliant last year. He's arguably a front runner for the Rising Star Award this year. Mitchell Lewis, he's on the younger side, and he's really starting to take strides towards becoming a very dominant key forward in the competition. Dylan Moore, he's been a great small forward for them this year. Particularly early on in the year, he was kicking goals in the first half for fun. He always managed to bag a couple in the opening quarter or in the second quarter. God, in terms of the young players, I can't really think of too many more off the top of my head, but they've got some bright young stars. They have some. In my opinion, they don't have quite as much upside as Adelaide. I'm going to keep on comparing them to Adelaide since they're like the two main rebuilding sides. But yeah, their rebuild, I think it's still on the right track. Probably like Adelaide, a couple more seasons down the lower end of the ladder before they really start challenging again. This year they could potentially hit the trade period hard, since I did see that they had a fair number of players out of contract coming to the end of this season. So they might trade for even more draft picks just to get a more top-end young talent on their list. But yeah, rebuild. It's going nicely. I probably think it's not quite as going as well as Adelaide's, maybe slightly below, but still, they'll be up and about again in a few years, no doubt. They're not going to stay down for all too much longer. Their same cannot be said about another rebuilding side in North Melbourne. They've been rebuilding for a while now, and they look like they'll continue to rebuild for a while going into the future. But yeah, I think that wraps up my Hawthorn mid-season review. Alright, so that'll wrap up my mid-season review for both of these clubs today. Look, I do plan on doing a couple more of these over the round, since there are still a couple of teams that I want to do reviews about that haven't played this round, or maybe even they aren't going to play this round, so I feel like I want to get those videos in before they play their 12th game, so I don't really want to do it after they play another game and are technically no longer at their halfway point in the season. So yeah, a couple of clubs I plan on doing reviews about are Essendon, GWS, Melbourne, Fremantle, Carlton and Brisbane. So that's just a heads up for the next week. So yeah, more footy content, more mid-season review content coming your way. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.